Iawn. Bore da. Croeso. Welcome to Police Headquarters here in Carmarthen. Croeso i'r pencadlys yma yng Nghaerfyrddin. This event is bilingual, so if you need translation services, translation headsets are available. If you haven't got one, now's the time to put your hand up, please. And Hefin, hopefully, there are a few here I can see that need headsets. Felly, fel fyddwch chi'n disgwyl I fi weid, braint ac yn rhydedd. Ros i'r blaen yma. Oh yeah, dylen ni falle, I should check that they work as well, shouldn't I? Be careful what, yes, thumbs up from people. Diolch yn fawr, thank you. You still need some down here, don't you? I feel very relaxed today, partly because I'm not doing the opening address and the speech at the beginning of the session, but also that music was quite calming as well. So if things get a bit heated, we might ask for the music to come back on at some stage. Great. Nicola, I'm concerned you still haven't got a headset. Right. Gwych. Achos, iawn, fi wedi sicrhau bod yr offer cyfieithu yn gweithio, achos o'n I moyn defnyddio'r cyfle, defnyddio'r iaith Gymraeg gymaint â phosib ar y dechrau, ar y cychwyn cynta, achos yn aml iawn yn nifer o gynadleddau dwi'n ei chynnal, mae pawb neu'r rhan fwyaf o bobl yn siarad yn y Saesneg, ond wrth gwrs, mae hon yn gynhadledd Gwyldewi. It is the annual St David's Day Conference, a mae'n anodd credu, mae hwn yw'r 9fed cynhadledd dwi wedi cynnal fel Comisiynydd Heddlu Dyfed-Powys. Oedd e'n syniad ges I pan ddechreuais I yn 2016 I ddod â pobl I Gaerfyrddin yn hytrach na bod ni o'r gorllewin yn aml yn gorfod teithio I Abertawe, Caerdydd, I Lundain, Manceinion, Caeredin ag ati. Fi'n sôn am Caeredin achos dyna'r lle cynta glywes I falle'n fwy swyddogol am beth y term yw Society of Evidence-Based Policing. Pan o'n i'n brif dadansoddydd heddlu Dyfed-Powys. Ac wrth gwrs erbyn heddi, dwi'n gomisiynydd, a dwi nawr yn gallu rhoi rhai o'r technegau a'r theories yna mewn I waith trwy y partneriaeth ni nawr wedi datblygu gyda'r brifysgol yma yng Nghaerfyrddin, a mae'n hynod o fraint I ni cael Elwen Evans gyda ni heddi, yr athro Elwen Evans yn rhoi anerchiad. Felly, dwi ddim yn goffa gweud yn byd, fel wedes I. Dwi'n mynd I wneud yr housekeeping, a mae yna ddarn o bapur mar rwle, fi ddim yn gallu gweld ar hyn o bryd. Falle bod fi wedi colli fe. Ond ta waith, ie, fi'n credu bod fi wedi colli fe. Dyn ni ddim yn disgwyl unrhyw alarwm tân heddi. Os oes angen I ni fynd allan o'r ystafelloedd, mae'r lle ble fyddwn ni'n ymgynnull tu allan. So the muster point is outside, out back through reception. Obviously, if that exit is blocked, there are other exits. Follow the little silhouette of the white man with a green background or the green man in a white background. I can never remember which way round. Toilets are just situated back through reception as you came in as well. And the running order today, and you've got your agenda in front of you, is that we will have the speakers, and what I will ask the speakers, the first three individuals that will come and give us an introduction, give us an input, if you could then join me on the stage and we'll have a questions and answers before the break. Felly fyddwn ni ddim yn gofyn cwestiynau pan mae unigolion wedi siarad, so mae eisiau chi falle wneud nodyn o'r cwestiynau. Mae Griff hefyd yn mynd I gallu crynhoi y sawl sydd ar y we, achos mae yna nifer o bobl yn ymuno dyn ni heddi yn rhithiol, I think that's one of the biggest benefits post-COVID, isn't it? Is that we've all got very tech savvy in relation to conferences and meetings, etc. So many people are joining us online, and we would like you to feel very welcomed in this conference here today, and use the chat facility online in order to ask questions, and Griff then will feed them back to me. Felly, ni ychydig funudau ar ôl amser, ond just gyda hynny o eiriau o croeso mawr, twym galon yma i'r pencadlys yn y gorllewin, pencadlys heddlu Dyfed-Powys. Dwi nawr yn mynd i ofyn i'r athro Elwen Evans i ddod i rhoi croeso a geiriau agoriadol i'r gynhadledd. Croeso mawr.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, iawn, iawn. Bore da pawb, mae'n rhaid fi ddeud, dwi ddim yn hapus tu nôl i un o hein. In a previous life, before I became whatever it is I am now, I was very much a practicing barrister. One of Her Majesty's Counsel for most of my practicing time, and it gets a little bit unusual to think of myself as one of His Majesty's Counsel. But I thought that I would share some reflections around evidence-based policing based on one of the cases that I prosecuted for Dyfed-Powys Police. It's a case I haven't spoken about in public, because I think that there are very important strictures that should be followed by counsel in very sensitive cases. And that's really out of respect, which will be one of the themes of what I have to say in opening the case. Respect is incredibly important in all of our roles, isn't it? And it comes to something when the new legislation, the Crime and Policing Bill, is introducing respect orders. We have to legislate now for respect. And I think that's quite a reflection on some of the challenges that you face in leading in the police force and in associated activities. And respect, I see that the third speaker today will be focusing on the criminal justice journey for victims. And there too, there is an enormous need for respect. And so in the case of April Jones, Mark Bridger, one of the reasons I've never spoken publicly about that case is respect for the family and for the community and for those police officers who contributed incredibly to a particularly sensitive and difficult investigation and case. I would like to tie in my observations with St. David's Day. And you'll remember the last words of Dewi Sant. Well, it's hotly debated whether they were the last words, but I think that they are useful words to reflect on. And of course, Ty Dewi is part of your patch in Dyfed-Powys, as is, of course, Llandewi Brefi, which renowned for many reasons, not least of which apparently Dewi Sant carried out some miracles there. But the last words, as attributed, byddwch lawen, cadwch y ffydd, newch y pethau bychain. So St. David's Day, and you may think, my goodness, really do those words have relevance for us in policing in 2025 when we have to legislate for respect and much else? Well, bear with me, I think they do. Of course, they don't translate very comfortably into English. English was not a language in St. David's Day. And so the translation's a little bit clunky. And so if one starts by saying, be joyful, oh my goodness, that's a rather strange message to try and share with those who are associated with the criminal justice, evidence-based or otherwise, in 2025. But actually, looking back to the Welsh language, and he was probably speaking a mixture of Latin, Old Welsh and Old Irish, the word llawen is more about purpose and achieving satisfaction through delivering purpose. So the message is about that purpose and getting satisfaction and a sense of achievement from delivering purpose. And my goodness, isn't policing and delivering on the criminal justice system all about satisfaction from purpose? Not always, because we then come on to the next part, keep the faith. It's sometimes very difficult, isn't it, to keep the faith? And I'm not using the term in its religious sense. Undoubtedly, that's what Dewi Sant meant it to be. But it's a much broader concept, isn't it? Keeping the faith. How difficult it sometimes is when perhaps that jury's verdict isn't what one expected, or there have been months of hard work into achieving an outcome, and there's the disappointment, and your faith in the criminal justice system becomes a little challenged. But it's very important as you move forward in your careers and in the investigation of cases to keep that faith in the criminal justice system. And the last part of the attributed to him last words is about doing the small things. And actually, evidence-based policing, any policing, is about doing the small things, because it's the small things that contribute to the ultimate big thing and outcome. And it is those small steps that you take, small steps of evidence, small steps of handling people with respect, wherever they are, within that process and within that system, which is key. So I hope that I'm not pushing St. David's message too far in saying that I think that those reflections are absolutely key in everything we do in relation to the criminal justice system. It is fantastic. Right in front of me here, in the middle of the room, accidentally, I'm sure, is a colleague of mine. We go back, I won't say how long we go back as barristers together in Swansea. And Frank was a wonderful colleague. And there was a phrase that we all knew that he used in his closing speeches. 2 and 2 makes 5. And that was his way of saying, don't overinterpret evidence. Don't just say that this bit of evidence and that bit of evidence put together is the outcome, because you are trying to rely too much on that approach. And actually, Frank got an incredible number of acquittals on his 2 + 2 doesn't equal 5 approach. But it's all about knowing how to put your evidence together. And in the Bridger case, I think it's right to say that one saw policing at its absolute impressive best. Police forces working together. Dyfed-Powys, of course, leading. It was just on the boundary between Dyfed-Powys and North Wales. And the North Wales police were absolutely working in harmony with Dyfed-Powys. The scenes of crime and so on from North Wales were down there very early on. It was police from all over the United Kingdom working also with a range of other agencies. So it was collaborative, impactful working at its very best and being led by a fantastic senior officer from Dyfed-Powys. There was a seriously focused sense of purpose, which was, of course, to see if the body of April Jones could be found. Months and months of hard, dedicated work. Forensic science at its cutting edge, led to a view that possibly some small traces of bone had been found in the fireplace of the defendant's home. But incredibly detailed evidence base that led down a really challenging route, and actually the witness who finally addressed the question of potential forensic scientific evidence within the fireplace was from Italy. So work absolutely driven around detail, around evidence, and actually the earlier word here for evidence-based was research-based. And actually that's a really powerful word, research in Welsh, a really powerful word as well because it's following through that process. But the forensic scientific was just one part. CCTV, hours and hours of footage put together, part of that compelling overall, overarching evidential picture. There was very, very detailed computer and phone evidence around usage of both phone and computer by the defendant, showing a long history of viewing extremely indecent and violent images. But again, a very big piece of work undertaken and led by Dyfed-Powys, although of course making use of other agencies and specialisms in order to ensure that the picture came together. So all sorts, and I remember very clearly the opening speech and then the closing speech was very much around the weaving together of the timeline of the evidence from all the different sources, never ever to forget, and I think sometimes we do, that people's witness evidence is also crucially part of evidence-based policing. There is a tendency in us to think, oh, let's go after the material that seems a little bit more reliable than people, because people do sometimes get their memories a bit jumbled up, don't they? But it's an incredibly important part of that task of bringing together the full picture, so that one also has, as part of that timeline of events and activities, and not to forget either the importance of the interviews, really experienced team of officers interviewing, careful preparation, and using a defendant's account, and how that may sometimes subtly change, not so subtly change, again, another part of that overall picture where everyone contributes. Looking after the family during the course of a trial, such as that, such as any serious case, so important, and done with enormous care, consideration and skill by dedicated officers. And I don't think anyone can for a moment underestimate the impact that policing in such a sensitive, difficult case can have on officers and others who are also involved in that. Always bear in mind that that support, often emotional support, is essential. Most of us, I suppose, like to think we're quite tough. But actually, when one's dealing with some of the work that you deal with, there's absolutely no harm in acknowledging that emotional impact, that emotional toll that it will take upon you. I, over my time in practice, as Frank also, have done many, many cases, and there are some that inevitably stay with one much more powerfully. Whenever I drive up through, and I do a lot because my parents live in North Wales, go up through Ymchwil and Canos that way, the case always comes back. Because we are ultimately all only human. And there will always be difficult cases and difficult decisions. But actually, it's not just in the big cases. It's not just in those big ones that take the headlines where your skills are absolutely essential. It's the little ones. It's doing the little things. Because at the end of the day, a big case will have a big impact, but also the little cases will have a big impact on those who are involved. And so, forgive me if I go back to the words of St. David's, byddwch llawen, have that purpose, have a pride in that purpose. Cadwch y ffydd, keep the faith, because there are going to be those really difficult times and cases and outcomes, but don't let it put you off your faith ultimately in the criminal justice system. I won't tell you how long I practiced. It's a long time. I still have faith in it. And that doesn't mean that every single case has gone the way that one thought it should have. But I still have faith that our criminal justice system, with evidence, with thought, with care, with appropriate leadership, is a very powerful one. And always, please, gnewch y pethau bychain. They might not always be visible, those little things, but undoubtedly, those little things may be the things that make a real difference to some of those people impacted by crime. The victims, those who care for the victims, and actually also the defendants. I defended, it was about 50-50 prosecuting and defending. And it was always reassuring when one got to the end of a case, even when a defendant was found guilty and didn't think they should have been, if they were able to say, yes, but the case was done properly. The case was done properly. And that actually then is doing little things which are important in having the credibility of the system maintained into the future. Diolch o galon i chi, diolch am y croeso, diolch am y gwahoddiad, a diolch yn fawr iawn i chi.
Elwen, diolch yn fawr iawn i chi. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi am y geiriau. Hynod o bwerus hynny. A mae nifer, pan o'ch chi'n sôn am y digwyddiad hynny a'r achos penodol honno, o'n i'n edrych o gwmpas yr ystafell, a mae nifer o unigolion oedd nath weithio ar y digwyddiad honno. Fy hunan yn gynwysiedig fel mae'n digwydd, mewn rôl bach. Iawn. Pan i ni'n meddwl am beth Dewi Sant, yna fe, a dathlu Gwyl Dewi, i ni'n clywed am gwneud y pethau bychan, ac wrth gwrs, dyna un o'r resymau pan dwi'n cynnal y gynhadledd. Mae'n un peth bach dwi'n gallu gwneud yma yn y gorllewin i dod pobl ynghyd at ei gilydd, a dod â pobl ynghyd o pellteroedd. And I'm going to say a big thank you to all of those who have travelled a fair distance to be here today and to contribute to today. I'm not sure who gets the badge of honour of travelling the furthest to be here today, but our next speaker, Dr. Matt Bland. Now, Matt is the Chief Operating Officer of the Society of Evidence-Based Policing, and he's going to be presenting on how police agencies can develop the culture of evaluation needed to be evidence-informed and focus on practical steps people can take in their own roles. And Matt and I were meeting and greeting earlier, and we actually worked as principal crime intelligence analyst within forces at about the same time. So it's a great honour to have you here today, Matt, in your role as the Chief Operating Officer. So if you would join us here on the stage, and we look forward to hearing from you with your input. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you.
Good morning. It's really nice to be in Wales. It's the first time I've been back to Wales, I think, since certainly before COVID. I can't pretend that I speak Welsh though, so I'm not even going to try to do that. So apologies for that. My slides are down here, so if you think that I'm sort of looking a little bit glum, I'm not. I'm looking at the screen down there, and I'll just try and work out this clicker just to make sure that works. So my name is Matt Bland. Thank you for the introduction. I started my career in policing in about 2003 in Suffolk, so a force which is often twinned with Dyfed-Powys in the way that we look at statistics for crimes when we compare forces together. I was saying to Dyfed, we will sort of look longingly west at the detection rates that Dyfed-Powys had and wonder what life is like in this force. My career did take a very similar path to Dyfed's in that I went from being in intelligence analysis inside policing to being in academia, which is where I still work today. I'm a professor at Cambridge University of evidence-based policing. And since last year, I am the Chief Operating Officer of a charity called the Society of Evidence-Based Policing. The founder of that charity is going to be here today. He is there, he's at the back waving. So he will tell you all about how the charity came about. And I'll touch a bit upon what we do through the course of this presentation. What I want to do is build on a couple of the themes that Professor Evans kicked off for us there, which is about these small things that might be in the background, but that can make a really big difference in policing, in the service that gets delivered on the front line to victims and in terms of preventing crime. And I'm going to talk about this thing which is on the surface of it quite a dry topic. It's evaluation culture. Evaluation culture is the thing that really sort of turns the gears of evidence-based policing. When people talk about evidence-based policing being a thing, it's a little bit like knitting fog. Evidence-based policing isn't a product or a particular service. It's more of a philosophy, a way of thinking about approaching policing. So it's hard to touch and feel, but one of the things that you would identify with any definition of evidence-based policing, and there are a few, is that evaluation is really at the heart of it. And what I want to talk about is how that really sort of touches into policing. And we talk about culture in policing quite a lot these days, particularly around professional conduct. Evaluation sort of plays into that, and this ethos of looking back at what is it that we're doing, and actually is this making a difference, and then changing what you do off the back of that. So I'm going to argue that policing is already quite a long way down the road in terms of developing a culture of evaluation. The fact that you're having this conference here today is a good sign of that. The fact that there is a charity called Society of Evidence-Based Policing, there is a College of Policing. These are all good indicators, good markers that policing is making some advances in terms of becoming something that a service that looks at evaluation as a core part of its values. But of course, there's more to do. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the barriers and some of the things that we might do to sort of get that a bit further. And I'm going to focus, I hope, on some practical things. First of all, I'm going to tell you a completely abstract story about Tesco, because I'm going to continue this thing with little things. And I want to draw this parallel of how organisations that are well set up and already quite successful can use data and evaluation to improve and transform their services. If you go back to the 1990s, the early 1990s, Tesco was struggling. It wasn't the sort of global dominant force that it has become since then. And like all retailers at that time, particularly those in that industry, They were seeking innovative ways to try to get ahead of their competitors. And they tried all sorts of different things. This is the norm for the private sector. They came across loyalty cards many years before. This wasn't a new thing. They used to have stamps, green card stamps. I don't know if everybody remembers those back in Tesco's. And they'd sort of dismissed this as an idea. This was other supermarkets, including Sainsbury's, had a look at this as an initiative to try and drum up business and said, look, know what, that's been done. We're not going to look at that. What Tesco did differently was, although they weren't convinced about this as a methodology, there was a lot of skepticism at board level, they agreed to try it in a very small number of stores. They initially rolled out the concept of the club card in 3 stores. And what that enabled them to do was collect data about the take-up and evaluate the usefulness of that as a tool. And it became very clear very quickly that they couldn't deal with all of the data they got back from those early club card initiatives. They were absolutely swamped. Within months, I think it's something like 6 out of every £10 spent in those 3 stores was being spent by a customer who had a Tesco club card. So they knew they were onto something. There was a take up here. But what they were doing was receiving all of this data back in on the purchases, the purchasing habits of these customers, and they just didn't have the computing power or the resources to be able to do anything about it. So they took a very novel approach, a very risky approach, and they said, okay, we're going to take 10% of the data, we're going to look at what that tells us, and we're going to start making our initiatives based on that 10% of the data. We're going to assume that 10% of the data is telling us everything we need to know about the rest of our customers. And they started to build out their business strategy in that vein. This continued for some time. We all know the story of Clubcard. It became super successful phenomenon and really drove the Tesco business for the next 20 to 30 years. But what Tesco were, and until quite recently, have been unable to do is really get into everything that gives them. They have to take a very triaged approach to using that data. And there's lots we can learn in policing from the approach they took. We just pick out these 3 aspects that I'll return to as we go through this. And I think what you'll see is examples of this throughout the other talks that you're going to get today in terms of what we're seeing in evidence-based policing. The first principle here is start small when it comes to these innovations and evaluating. You don't need to design the world's fanciest bells and whistles randomized control trial to be having an evaluation culture. It can start much more small and much more practical than that. In fact, I would argue it needs to, because otherwise you won't get the momentum. You know, I've worked on trials and still working on trials that last 5 years. You know, that we need to be doing things that actually show some results and give us some feedback, so police decision makers can be doing things with those results almost straight away. And that Tesco got that right. They couldn't wait. They were into what data they could work with and using that to drive their activity. Crucially, that activity was driven by educated guesses. If you're working with 10% of your data on your customers, in Tesco's case, easy to sort of transpose that over to what that might look like in policing, you can't be sure that the decisions you're making are absolute stone cold home runs. You are making educated guesses. And often when I'm talking about evidence-based policing, I talk about this in the language of betting. Evidence-based tells you where to put your money, where the most likely winners are for whatever problem you're trying to solve. But very, very rarely is it 100% certainty. That's not what evidence-based policing is about. And the evaluation culture that sits behind that needs to represent that. It needs to be in the spirit of informing decisions as educated guesses. And I'll return to the subject of failure a couple of times in this talk. It's okay to fail. In fact, it's really important to fail. And what Tesco were able to learn from trying things quickly was if they didn't work, they could learn that quickly and spin into a different direction. Sometimes they'd do that and they'd be wrong about it, and they hopefully would learn about that later. But this became the sort of gears that turned their business. Obviously, policing is not retail. Tesco exists to make money. Police forces do not. They have a very complicated, multifaceted mission. But there is a definable mission there, very definable. And if we can do that, then we can start to take that apart and look at the things that try to influence it. Policing has threats just as Tesco had threats. So Tesco is worried about its competitors and getting out ahead of its competitors. Policing has threats from rising crime, rising demand, shrinking resources, eroding legitimacy in the community that it needs to get out ahead of. So it needs to understand what works best in dealing with those threats and, crucially, what doesn't. And that is really the entire ethos of what evidence-based policing is about. Using particular methods, hopefully as rigorous as possible, to get to that point where you understand these two things. We've got a problem, what works best to solve that problem, and what shouldn't we be doing to solve that problem? And the key to unlocking that is evaluation. So let me this is not new. There'll be people in this room and the people in every room I go to thinking, great, Matt, but we've been talking about this for years and this already exists. And they're right, it does. Evidence-based policing has been around since 1997 in that terminology, when it was first talked about by Professor Lawrence Sherman over in the United States. And the fact that we are still talking about it nearly 30 years later in those terms is actually pretty remarkable for policing, because if you've been here 20, 30 years, you'll see the same concepts come back, usually by a different name. But evidence-based policing has stuck all the way through that. I think it's fair to say it hasn't always been in vogue. It may have sort of cropped up around the late 90s, but we weren't really sort of talk about it and using it in everyday policing language until 2010 thereafter, around the time the College of Policing was formed and sort of built up with that spirit in mind. And I think it's fair to say there's still some way to go. There's still a large school of thought that evidence-based policing is not the right approach to policing. I think for my part, having been on a journey for the last half of my career with evidence-based policing, I'd say it's not the answer to every problem that policing has, but it certainly isn't a bad thing. And if you look at it as being one tool in the toolbox of policing, it's a pretty good one. It can do a lot of different things and potentially solve a lot of different problems that policing has to solve. But like anything in policing, it is done differently in different places. There are subtly different definitions of evidence-based policing. This is a global phenomenon. It started in the United States, and it's really been picked up primarily in the UK initially. Alex will tell you about the sort of global expansion of societies of evidence-based policing, I'm sure. The general principles of applying scientific methodology in policing sort of hold all of that together, but the actual footprint of it on day-to-day practice, that's different wherever you go. And even in England and Wales, or perhaps I should say especially in England and Wales, because it's not uncommon to cross the border from one force into another and find that things are done quite differently. That's true as well of evidence-based policing. I often sort of pause and ask myself when thinking about this, is there actually any incentive in UK policing to evaluate things, to do evidence-based policing? I very obviously think there is, but there are certain things that we need to think about, some certain key signs. A key sign that something is a priority for policing in England and Wales is that there's a National Police Chiefs Council lead for it. There isn't one for evidence-based policing, which is not the be-all and end-all. It's not necessarily a problem. You might argue that in the College of Policing, there's actually a whole part of UK policing which is dedicated to it. But it's interesting because each of those portfolios will have its own priorities that it's trying to drive forward, and we might try touch points to those on evidence-based policing across the board. But who is actually looking after evidence-based policing as its own entity? Policing is. Is there anybody from His Majesty's Inspectorate in the room? Excellent. I can speak freely. There's probably some online. Policing is beset by recommendations from His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, Fire and Rescue Services. They're a very important organisation. You only need to look across the Atlantic to see how important independent regulators are at the moment. So I don't speak of the Inspectorate with any ill intent. But I would make the observation that they make a lot of recommendations, and those recommendations carry a lot of weight if you are a senior leader in policing. So a lot of influence of what happens is actually instigated in the HMIC domain. I would offer the perhaps unsurprising and I think uncontroversial opinion that some of those recommendations are not rooted in evidence. In fact, some of them go directly against evidence. And I think that's something that's worthy of our attention when thinking about evaluation culture. Because if a police force is truly going to have an evaluation culture, then it might be in a position where it needs to turn around and say, actually, Inspectorate, we're not going to do that. We don't do that here because we've looked at this, we've looked at these solutions, and this isn't the way forward. Police is also, really influenced by missives, by policy, by national policies that come through, or the next big thing that's capturing the national attention. And one thing we often hear is, this is not the same in this force as it is everywhere else, and that really is the truth. Where everybody works off the same legal framework, but every community is different, and every police force needs to have its own way of doing things. And I think when we think about an evaluation culture, we need to think about factoring that in. So I think, and I'm going to make the argument to you, that the evidence-based policing is going to become only more important. This is not going anywhere anytime soon. Let's just talk about some of the indicators of that. First of all, there are a growing number of tools out there. Rob's nodding down here. Rob Braddock's going to talk to you later about some of the things that the College of Policing do around evidence-based policing. If you think of evidence-based policing as, in part standing on the shoulder of research that's gone before, the experiences of people out there in the field and the results they've had before, it can start to look a little bit like a metaphorical pile of different research items. That pile is getting really big. And what we need to do is find ways of cutting through that, because people haven't got time to go rummaging through that pile to find the things they need. The college and organisations like the Youth Endowment Fund are doing a really good job of doing that on behalf of policing. So there are already tools out there where if you've got a problem, you can go and try and find some of the answers to those problems, or at least something to get you on the way. And I'm quite happy to share some of the links to these if people haven't seen them. The What Works Centre for Crime Reduction is a really good starting point. The Youth Endowment Fund Toolkit, another one. You're also seeing increasingly that government-led initiatives are actually baking in evaluations to a high standard at the point that they're commissioned, which is not always a guaranteed thing. So it's really encouraging. I'm actually part of a pilot with the Ministry of Justice where they're doing a randomised trial of polygraph tests for domestic abuse offenders, which was actually a new bit of legislation in the Domestic Abuse Act from 4 years ago. And I think that's possibly the first bit of legislation which is contingent on the output of a randomised trial. But we're seeing this increasingly in non-legislative policies as well. So I don't know if Dyfed-Powys was part of the GRIP funding that the Home Office has recently, or in the last few years, been focusing on serious youth violence. But any force that was receiving extra funds for that was required to do randomised controlled trials as part of having the funding. And at the moment, I'll talk about clear hold and build. Does clear hold build get used here in Dyfed-Powys? So I'll talk a bit about that as well in a moment. That again, all of these are contributing to the pile of things that we know about policing, or we're starting to understand about policing, and it's becoming more normal for these things to be published. Apart from in the Metropolitan Police, where they sit on them all and protect them. But it is now quite normal for police forces who are doing evaluations or working with universities on evaluations to put them out there, either in peer-reviewed journals or make them available online, which is great because it means other people can learn from them. So these are all good things, and they're all contributing to the momentum that is evidence-based policing. Now, let me just talk. I'll just give you two recent examples of those. And it will probably spell out, I think it will spell out a little bit of the problem that we have here with some of this. Clear hold build. Can I just, by show of hands, who has not heard of clear hold build? Please be honest. Okay, so okay. So clear hold build is a strategy for policing serious and organised crime, which has emerged from military paradigm. So it's a place-based strategy. So you have a place where serious and organised crime, particularly county lines, drug type business, has taken hold in a location. The ethos of clear hold build is that you go in there with enforcement tactics to clear that problem out. You hold the area, and then using problem solving and multi-agency tactics, you build it into something that's better. This, over the last 2-3 years, has become quite common to see across UK policing, and it's got a cool name, clear hold build. You can remember that. So people have really sort of stuck to this idea. The Home Office published their evaluation, or the evaluation they sponsored a few weeks ago. By a show of hands, has anybody, I'm not going to ask if you've read it, has anybody seen that it's come out? Yeah, I know you would have done, Alex, because I sent it to you. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so here's a national policing strategy. There's quite a lot of money being pumped into clear hold build. And the evaluation that's come out is not buried, it's there, it's very easy to find, but it's really complicated and a bit ambiguous. I'll paraphrase what it says for you. We think it reduces acquisitive crime, theft, vehicle crime, maybe, but it doesn't reduce violent crime or drug crime, and doesn't make the public feel any more confident, as far as we can tell. Elsewhere, you've got studies like the one at the bottom there, and again, I'll put the links into these in the slides if Dr. Sandy wants to send them out. This is one of the trials that was conditional on government funding for hotspot policing to reduce knife crime. So the ethos here was send police officers into the highest crime locations for serious youth violence to try to reduce it with their patrol presence. And in Thames Valley, they developed an application on a phone to track whether officers were going into those locations. Because the biggest problem with this type of tactic is police officers won't do it when they're asked to do it. So Thames Valley took this approach to asking officers to check in on their phones when they were there. They could ratify that with a GPS signal. And they found this app made a huge difference to the compliance with where officers were asked to go at the times they were asked to go there, for the length of time they were asked to go there. So that's a really good step forward. And they've published the details of this. What they also say is it doesn't actually make a difference to crime in their areas. So they were sending officers into these places, but not suppressing the crime levels. There's a lot of detail in that they were using very large, more rural areas than other forces where this tactic has been proven to work. So again, we're starting to see the local nuance, but all within this paradigm of evaluation and being shared so other people can learn from it. The core foundations for this lasting in policing are already there. Every new police officer will now be trained in a module on evidence-based policing, on problem-oriented policing. Doesn't make them evaluation experts. In fact, I think they have a really hard job when they then go out to the reality of policing to see how you plug that into the real world. But the seeds are planted, the seeds are there. And I think the exec leadership program has the same now. When people go up to become chief officers, again, they're doing modules on evidence-based policing. And there is more that is coming down the pipe. So the National Police Chiefs Council are funding, with the UK Research Institute, 9 police academic centres of excellence, which will work together across the country to really sort of promote this type of work even further. Now, I want to make some of this can all be very abstract, you know, journals, national funding, some of that's out of reach. So I want to talk about making this more practical. Can I just get a time check on how long I've got left? 10 minutes? 5? I'll do it in 5. We'll do 5, no problem. Test and learn. This is a new phrase I'm hearing over and over again. It's particularly common in central government at the moment. It is very, very similar to what I started with talking about with Tesco. And it really sort of speaks to the core principles of evidence-based policing and a culture of evaluation. Start small and make educated guesses and work out what doesn't work really fast. And do this on what you're doing right now. So we've got examples of this that are happening, have been happening for a long time. But I want to talk about not putting in polygraph tests for domestic abuse offenders or clear hole build strategies. There will be dozens of policing activities happening right now today across this police force, and they can be tested and learned from, and they don't have to be big things. So what we've learned with this type of project in the past is if you change the wording on reminders to people when they're being asked to pay their tax, you can boost tax compliance by 15%. I know police are not in the game of, well, some police are in the business of raising tax. I shouldn't. Sorry, David. If you change the wording in the letters that you give to victims, perhaps that can make a difference to prevention. It doesn't need to be super expensive, but you know, nudge theory can make some serious differences. SMS reminders. If you send a text reminder to people who are due to attend a drug treatment appointment tomorrow, trials have shown you can increase the attendance rate just with that one simple measure. And these don't have to be complicated randomized control trials to do it. Sometimes you just need to get in there and look at what's happening with the things that you're doing. I think it's really important to focus, again, going back to that Tesco principle, not on everything you're doing right now, because there'll be far too much. But there'll be some things out there that are absolutely crucial to delivering on the priorities, whatever police force you're working in. And the key question to ask is, are they working? Do those things work? We already have a framework for evaluations below the level of these complex randomized controlled trials, and even below the level of trying to do complicated synthetic statistical controls. If I'm teaching my students about evaluation levels, I often say, you know, how do you evaluate whether the thing that you have done has made a difference? And often they'll say, well, did crime go up or down after we started doing it? Now that's really low level on the scale of evaluation. You can see that's level 2 on that scale, but it's better than nothing. You know, it's a start. It starts to contribute to this pile, and we're making a smaller pile here, but you're starting to make a difference in terms of the learning that you're getting. And you can work your way up from there. You can start to learn about the concept of comparison groups. You know, how do we start to integrate areas or people that we didn't do the thing to, who might be comparable, and we might be able to learn something further and work your way through that journey of evaluation. We're doing this in the Society of Evidence-Based Policing ourselves. We're really committed to trying to be a evidence-led charity. So if you, who in here is a member of the society, I should ask, please? Hands. One person to, right, well, you're going to, I expect to see some people taking pictures of the QR code to join when I put it up in a moment. If you are a member, you will get our monthly newsletter, which will tell you about new studies that have come out and new events like this one. And you will be getting different versions of that newsletter from left to right. Don't worry about looking at the detail. What we are trying to test is, do people react better to one way of pitching it to another way of pitching it? It doesn't cost us anything. It cost me about 20 minutes of trying to set that up, and we'll learn something about the different formats and refine and improve from there. Very briefly, let me talk about some of the barriers we need to overcome. In policing, doing nothing is really not an option. You've got to do something, got to do it quick. And this is where test and learn can really play an important role in the next part of evidence-based policing. It's fine to do something on quick response, but put in place something that tells you whether it's working or not. And it's remiss of me not to get a dig in at the promotion process in policing at any of these talks. Failure is not acceptable as far as my experience in promotion boards. You have got to say that the thing you did in your last job was a roaring success. That is typically the way forward. I think the true test of whether evaluation culture has taken proper root in policing will be when people can say, well, I tried this thing and what I learned from it not working was this. That will be the true test. I'm going to wrap this up by going to how the Society of Evidence-Based Policing is trying to get us, contribute and play a role in getting to the policing to a full evaluation culture. We think there's a really important role in soft upskilling at all levels of the service in different ways. People in different roles need to understand different things about evaluations. Not everybody needs to know how to do a research design or how to do synthetic statistical controls, but some people do. The key thing is to ask the right questions and ask them repeatedly. What are we doing now? Is it working? Do we need to change what we're doing from the back of what we've learned? And that's right across policing, not just in crime prevention, but in demand reduction, in recruitment and retention. There's things to learn all across the board, and you're going to hear about a variety of different inputs in that respect. The society, just to conclude, is trying to create what we call a community of practice. So for anybody working in and around policing who wants to become engaged with evaluation culture or well, whatever level, we're trying to create a space online where people can come and join in and meet other people who are interested in the same topic, share ideas, meet experts, find resources that are out there, signpost into what the college have got and other agencies. So we are launching at the end of this week a members hub, which is entirely free for our members. You can sign up on the QR code that I'm about to put up on the screen, and you'll be able to access resources that haven't previously been available. We are really keen to sponsor and engage with local events like this. So we're sort of trying to improve our regional network in Wales at the moment by recruiting a coordinator, and we'll be looking to put on more conferences like this. And we have events online as well. So every second Friday of the month we do implementation focused webinars, and we really encourage you to get involved. If this is an area of policing that interests you, please join in. We are a grassroots charity. Apart from me, I'm the only paid member of staff. Everybody else is either from academia or policing, and they give a couple of hours a month to contribute to this really important movement that's going on in policing. I think I went over my 5 minutes, but my last slide is the QR code. Please put your phones up and join. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Matt. Should we keep the QR code up for a couple of minutes to try and get as many people signed up as possible? And yeah, you can treat Dyfed-Powys Police as an ally of the Society of Evidence-Based Policing, and because I know that there are people who are signed up within the organisation, and it's something that we're trying to embed, and we're on a journey. You used the word earlier, journey. So diolch yn fawr iawn, thank you. It was 2 weeks ago. I nearly said last week, but 2 weeks ago I launched my police and crime plan. So I don't just increase taxation, as was alluded to earlier. We also are duty-bound within the first 12 months of office to produce a police and crime plan. And my police and crime plan was launched a few weeks ago. And at the heart of that is the support that we provide for victims, and to try and ensure that Dyfed-Powys Police and the wider criminal justice system in the Dyfed-Powys area is centred around victims. So it is with great pleasure that I now introduce Jessica Rees. Jess, Victim Support Area Manager for Wales. Jess will be presenting on the impact of integrating lived experiences into the criminal justice system to better address victim needs, and combining victim narratives with research to provide a victim-centred approach that prioritises empathy, justice and recovery, which, as I said earlier, is central to the police and crime plan that we have here in Dyfed-Powys. So, Jess, over to you. Diolch.
Lovely. Diolch, Commissioner. This is the clicker as well, isn't it? So, I've got that there. Bore da pawb. Dwi'n dysgu Cymraeg, felly byddwch yn amnieddgar gyda fi. Dwi'n hapus iawn o fod yma heddiw yn cynrychioli victim support ac rydym yn falch iawn o fod yn darparu gwnaethau fi draws Dyfed-Powys unwaith eto. Hopefully, you just heard, good morning everybody. I'm learning Welsh, so please bear with me. I'm very happy to be here today representing victim support, and we're very proud to be providing services across Dyfed-Powys again. So fingers crossed that made sense in Welsh. So today I am going to speak about how we can strengthen victims' voice in our evidence and our data collections. But I first just really cheekily wanted to take the opportunity to launch our new service as well in Dyfed-Powys. So we are Victim Support Dyfed-Powys. And for those of you who haven't come across this before, we are a national charity that provides support to anyone affected by crime. We're independent from the police, but we do work closely with police and other criminal justice advocates to improve advocacy for victims and improve their overall experiences of the criminal justice system. Last year, we were successful in the re-tender for the victim service for the adult and children contract. And you may have known the service previously as Seiliedig, but we are now victim support, and we went live in November. So just a brief overview of what we do. So we do provide free and confidential tailored support to anyone affected by crime, including witnesses. And for the first time, we're able to provide that support to children and young people. We found that working with children and young people directly has been able to give children a voice in a system where previously we weren't able to. And we also do a lot of work within school settings, as well as working with the family members, and we can do a whole family support for that as well. We also provide some specialist support, so that's to standard and medium risk domestic abuse, high risk antisocial behaviour, and fraud. Of course, we also support all other crime types as well, such as your assaults, your burglaries, your harassments, but we also have those specialisms within the team too. We have national services that cover the whole of England and Wales, including Dyfed-Powys within that. We have the Victim Terrorism Unit, which provides a virtual caseworker model, and they can be deployed at any time after a terrorist incident. the National Homicide Service, which supports anyone bereaved by homicide, and the Wales Hate Crime Support Centre, so that supports victims of hate crime and incidents across Wales. Our key pillars of our support framework are that we try to make sure the victims feel safer, we keep them informed of their rights and their entitlements, we validate their feelings and their experiences, and we help them to reflect and explore new ways of coping whilst connecting them to local services. So, meet the team. We have the team right here. Give a wave, everyone. Well done, Dad. So, within the team, we've got our amazing operations manager, Nicola, that you might have known previously. And we also have a team of triage and early interventions officers, a service delivery assistant to be recruited, but service delivery assistant, multi-crime caseworkers, and a children and young persons caseworker. So the triage role is really around providing that initial contact and that immediate support in the aftermath of a crime. We receive a referral from Dyfed-Powys Police, but can receive them for all of our agencies as well, 48 hours after a crime has occurred. So they really are the first people that are hearing the story of what happened to them and the impact of that crime. So they're really skilled in being able to identify the risk, identify need, and then put that support in place. Once that support is in place, it will go over to one of our very skilled caseworkers. And again, they pick up all types of crime, but they do have champions within the areas that are highlighted on the screen. So we've got fraud, domestic abuse, antisocial behaviour, mental health, and older people. And they will be upskilled in those areas through additional training, and also sit on our internal community of practices where we can share best practice across victim support. So I'll get on to the main bulk of the talk now. I just wanted to shout out to the team. So, victims of crime bring with them powerful narratives that provide invaluable insight into the real-world impacts of crime. Their voices can reveal gaps in the criminal justice system, highlight areas where we're failing to meet their needs, and offer the first-hand accounts of trauma, resilience, and recovery. So how do we capture these lived experiences in the work that we do? So it starts at the initial contact stage, where we will do a distance travel survey with victims, and that's where we ask them to self-score themselves on a scale of 1 to 10 in 5 key areas. So those areas are health and well-being, how they feel their perception of safety is, how integrated and supported that they feel, their ability to cope, and their experiences of the criminal justice system. So by scoring this at the start of our support, is we get a real feel for how the victim feels they are in all of those areas. Then we can do a needs and risk assessment at that point as well, just to identify what are the main barriers that they're facing, and what are the main things that they need support with at that time, capturing how they feel truly in those first sort of couple of days after a crime has occurred to them. Then during support, we'll work with our caseworkers to do support planning. And this again is where we'll understand, as time has gone on, what kind of barriers are we still facing? What are the main things that we need support and help with now as we move through the criminal justice system? We'll also do interim distance travel surveys here as well, if required, just to see if there's been any deterioration from when we first spoke to them, or if there's been any improvement. And then, of course, at the end of support, we can then sort of work with them around how they feel they are at the end. And that's a really important score, because not only does it help us understand whether they've improved or deteriorated in any of those 5 key areas, it's also a reflective tool for the victim to look back on and think, how far have I come? And that's often quite a really sort of positive way to end support, is reminding somebody of their journey and their strength. We also ask for service user feedback at this stage as well. So that's primarily to look at our own service improvisation and how we can improve. And we'll also get consent for any case studies so that we can continue to share their stories moving forward. We'll also ask them to take part in Victims' Voice, which I'll come into in a little bit soon. And we'll also ask them if they would like to participate in any lived experience forums, whether that be internally with us or externally through the OPCC or any other forums that we're aware of. And again, this is where I think the skill of the team really does come into play, because you want to be making sure that the people that we're speaking around joining the forums are people that really want to share their story and make a difference. I think we can tell from somebody's voice sometimes who wants to sort of be able to share their story so that it doesn't have to happen to somebody else, who is sort of main closure for support is around making sure that this doesn't happen again and that their story is heard. And I think that's where the skill of our team comes into play and can really identify those people. And making sure, of course, that we're not re-traumatizing people and that we're not asking them to relive anything that they don't wish to. So then what do we do with that data? So service improvement is a big one, and that's where we'll be looking at how they experienced our service and what could be improved. We've done a lot with this, particularly in relation to service accessibility and sort of how we contact people and sort of how we support as well. Also with VCOP compliance, so we are finding that when we're speaking to people, when we're supporting them, caseworkers in particular will be able to get a really good insight into where VCOP compliance hasn't been met. Not all victims will quite understand the Victims Code of Practice and sort of what their rights and entitlements are. So it is for our caseworkers and our teams then to sort of inform them of where their rights aren't being met, and then we can provide feedback and insight on those rights not being met to commissioners, local criminal justice boards, so that we can add that kind of qualitative element to what we know already exists in a quantitative format. We can also look to identify any gaps. So, for example, post-COVID, we were trying to go back to normal and supporting people through face-to-face appointments, through telephone calls. And we had quite a lot of feedback from victims that actually that didn't work for them anymore. And they wanted to be able to pick up support when it suited them and sort of at a time that wasn't sort of transfixed in the week. So we developed My Support Space, which is an online self-help platform and app. And that has over 80 interactive guides around different crime types, but also kind of practical things like how to write a victim personal statement. What is the Victims Code of Practice? And sort of emotional coping tools as well around getting better sleep, improving your well-being and coping with trauma. So victims can kind of access that whenever they want, confidentially and in their own time. It's also important that we share best practice, touching on themes earlier. So, for example, in Thames Valley, they've recently had a new contract where they're only supporting people, or mainly supporting people via group work. So it kind of takes away from that one-to-one sort of caseworker support that we're used to, and it opened up a new way of supporting people. So we've been able to sort of take any learnings and best practice from that and develop a small pilot in Wales looking at group work and seeing how we can implement that and getting the best out of it for victims. And what we're finding, as you can imagine, is that peer support and that feeling of not going through it alone has been really empowering for victims. It's also really important that we share the stories. So when people want their voices to be heard, particularly when they feel like they haven't necessarily been heard throughout the criminal justice process, is we have a duty to share those stories. A recent example of this was in our Hate Hurts Wales campaign, which you might have seen, I hope you've seen, at your sort of local radio stations and at your local train stations. It's a Welsh Government funded campaign to raise awareness of hate crime. And what we were able to do is work with a victim of disability hate crime who had been targeted for a visual impairment. And she completely set the scene in terms of her story, working with the media marketing agency. And in her words, she portrayed what happened to her, how it made her feel, what were the key things that made a difference to her journey. That was portrayed then in a 60-second, I'm looking at Becca, 60-second ad to raise awareness of hate crime. And she had approval of absolutely everything. So every script went through her, every storyboard, even the choice of actor and their voice. Nothing sort of went through without her say so. And, I think I can say for her on her behalf, that was such an empowering experience for her. And although difficult to have her story out there, she knew the good it would do to increase confidence in others to report and also to, again, make people know that they're not alone. It's also good to identify the key themes and challenges. So, sorry, I didn't even introduce myself. So I'm the area manager for Wales at Victim Support. So I oversee all of our victim service contracts in Wales. And it gives a really good oversight to know what's happening consistently across Wales, what are the major issues that are affecting all victims of crime, generally speaking, and what's a more kind of localised issue, and then we can have a more local response. So we can feed that back again to local commissioners and sort of highlight areas where we might want to make tweaks or changes locally on what needs to have a kind of all Wales approach. So VS Voice is our lived experience forum that's all based on an app. It's basically where previous service users of ours can join the app and can participate in as many surveys as they like. So there's about 2 surveys a week that are posted on the app, and they have such a wide variety of topics. So sometimes it's all about kind of the victim's ideas and opinions on certain things. Other times it's around what changes are needed in the criminal justice system, what changes are needed in our service, and generally like their thoughts and feedback on a variety of topics related to the criminal justice system. We can also do sort of bespoke surveys. So very recently, we were in the process of trying to rename our service from Seiliedig. And what better way to sort of try and work out how to name our service than to consult with victims that would be accessing the service, as well as partners in the room. So shout out to any partners who completed the survey. Thank you. It was really great to see that actually the resounding sort of winner of the name was actually victim support Dyfed-Powys. And the feedback around that was because it's clear, it says what it is, you know, it's on the tin. And when you're in a traumatic state after experiencing a crime, you just need things to be simple and clear. And that runs through so many themes of what we also hear around how police communicate with victims, how the courts communicate. It just needs to be simple and clear. So yeah, we can do bespoke surveys that are sort of tailored to local need, or if we're particularly interested in a certain topic, then we can ask a cohort of victims then to complete that survey for insight. So what I'm actually going to do now is take you through some of recent insights that I think hopefully you'll find interesting. So one of this survey brief insight was around victims' rights during reporting, and particularly how victims felt around this. So I know we gather a lot of data and evidence around how much crime is being reported, how many times an officer makes contact within a certain time frame. When we're hitting these quantitative targets, we want to know how well we're doing, which obviously makes sense. But how does that actually feel for the victim? Does that actually mean anything? And that's, I think, where the qualitative lived experience comes in to provide a whole story narrative. So as you can see from this survey, 41% of the victims surveyed hadn't heard about the Victims Code. Now, these are people that have gone through the criminal justice process. These aren't people that haven't yet experienced crime. These are people that have actively been a victim and they weren't aware of the Victims Code. And some of the other themes around what they think could be better around upholding victims' rights was around clear communication. So understanding what's been said and making sure that it's been confirmed that they know what was said, and then knowing what's the next steps, what they're going to expect, how those expectations being managed. And this, when we've had these insights, so the insights are taken through across England and Wales, but when we read these and we can see, yes, that mirrors what we see locally too, so when we know it's kind of more of a consistent national picture. So this survey, sorry, the font is so small, I don't know if you can see it. I can't see it from my little screen down there. But this survey was around the proposed policies for prevention and immediate response to the Violence on Women and Girls Act. So 55% of the respondents did say that they were survivors of violence. And for them, the main priorities that felt most important to them were that they'd put DA specialists in 999 control rooms, and that there were specialist sexual assault teams in local police forces. So they came through as the 2 strongest points. Closely followed then by enhancing stalking protection orders. And I can't read the rest. Ensuring schools address misogyny and healthy behaviours. Build on the Online Safety Act. Strengthen the law in relation to spiking, and banning the creation and development of deep fakes. So again, not to say those priorities aren't important, but that is what the cohort of victims that we surveyed felt were the main priorities, or should be the main priorities. for the government. And then this survey was all around victims' experiences going to court. And I think something that we talk about in a lot of local criminal justice boards, and not just in Dyfed-Powys, is around the high attrition rates and what can we be doing to sort of improve this. And I think providing sort of a simple survey like this to get insights on what would improve things, what would make somebody more or less likely to engage, provides a really important qualitative aspect to this subject. So 52% of participants would drop out of the court process if it lasted over 12 months. Half of the participants felt that 6 to 12 months was the maximum acceptable time for reporting a crime and then receiving a case decision. 30% felt that the case being adjourned 1 to 2 times would then lead them to consider dropping out. So, these are the expectations of victims. We know this isn't being met. So, having this insight at least lets us know what the expectations are from the offset. And 75% said that meeting the prosecutor handling their case before being cross-examined would be really helpful for them. So if we know that majority of victims would find this helpful, let's make that our priority when we're looking at attrition rates. We also run a lived experience forum for the CPS. So similar really to get sort of feedback and views on some of their correspondence and their documents around how they communicate with victims. So we had a small focus group, and the areas that they provided feedback on were all around how they were responded to and how they were communicated with. They recommended that they added contact details for the CPS for the documents that are being sent to victims. So they said that the documents, they're really clear and easy to understand, but they had absolutely no contact details on there on who to contact about their case, which in hindsight, when you look back at the feedback, it feels really obvious, but it does sometimes take somebody to look at this, put themselves in their shoes and provide that feedback. Also about when and how to give feedback about their experiences. So they were asking for that kind of, sort of satisfaction rate with the CPS and their experiences and how it could be improved. But that also came at the same time as they found out about their case decision. And that wasn't always a positive experience for the victim. So then being asked to give feedback in the same breath just didn't really make a lot of sense to them. Also, there were no support service details on the correspondence, so just adding a QR code where they could then be taken to a list of signposting services was really helpful, again, particularly when there had been a negative case outcome. And also having a better understanding on the different roles within the CPS. So throughout the documents, they were referring to different roles, different people, but absolutely no idea what these people did, how they could help. So now they've included a kind of a little side section that has details about who they are and how they can help you moving forward. So just really small tweaks that have been made, but can hopefully now really improve that communication experience for victims. And then I'm going to talk you through LEAF as well, which is our Lived Experience Advocacy Forum for the Wales Hate Support Centre. So this is an example, I guess, of where we have taken lived experience and really put it in the hands of the group rather than sort of dictating, this is what we want to find out from you. We've set up the group to tell us what they want to do for themselves and how they want to use their voice for good. So when taking learning from LEAF, they made it really clear about the things that they would consider when thinking about taking part in the lived experience forum. And that's around empathy, so making sure that anyone involved understands how they feel. Validation, so showing that their feelings count and that they are important and that everything that they have to say in this space is contributing towards something. Being believed, so not doubting what they've said. Some of the stories we hear can feel really unbelievable sometimes, but it's really important that people feel believed and that they are believed by anyone involved in sort of facilitating these sessions. And honesty, so acknowledging that overnight, things aren't going to change, and that they're not going to go to a focus group, provide some feedback, and then all of a sudden everything's going to change. But about us being honest about what that looks like, where the bumps are on the road, and how they still can make a difference. So some of the things that the LEAF group really wanted to focus on when they started working with us, and they also named themselves LEAF, by the way, it's not me just having an acronym, was looking at barriers to reporting hate crime. There's a lot of academic research out there already, which is brilliant, around the barriers to reporting hate crime. But this group really wanted to do it from their perspective. And they wanted to do a piece of research on what were the barriers, so before even reporting. So you experienced a hate crime and you were in that contemplation mode of, I don't know if I should or should I not report. So what the barriers are there and how we can overcome those. Then during reporting, so what's keeping somebody engaged in that process? What's helping them not to drop out, because it can be a really scary, intimidating time. Particularly, I think, in hate crime, we see a lot of antisocial behaviour and neighbour-related hate crime. So knowing that you could be aggravating things with your neighbour as well can make you want to drop out, and it can completely sort of change that train of thought for you around reporting hate crime. So what are the barriers at that point? And again, how can we overcome them? And at the end of the investigation, what are the barriers then to reporting hate crime again in the future? Unfortunately, we know that a lot of victims of hate crime are repeat victims, and so it is unfortunately likely to happen again. So what is going to be your kind of indicator for whether you're going to report hate crime again in the future or if you're not going to? So they wanted to focus on these 3 points so that they could raise awareness to police and criminal justice advocates. And I believe that research is available. Becca, I'm looking at you. Yes. Okay, yes, thank you. You can share the link if anyone's interested. But I think that's also gone back to the Hate Crime Criminal Tensions Board, isn't it, as well? Sharing that learning there. Also, our Hate Hurts Wales campaign, which I mentioned earlier. So, like I said, we've had one particular victim that's been incredibly engaged in the process, but the LEAF group as a whole have also fed back on every campaign that we've had. I think we're on the 4th or 5th campaign burst now. And again, they're able to have everything run past them first, making sure that they feel happy with the content, that it's landing well, and that it's sort of centred around the victim's voice and not sort of focused on the offender. And also improving our own service. So we asked the LEAF group to look at their experience of accessing support with us and letting us know where we could improve moving forward. And they actually come up with a recommendation around when support is on a waiting list. So at some points during the service, we had to invoke a waiting list for victims of hate crime. So it's making sure then at that point, when that happens, they can still receive just like a weekly check-in call or a weekly text that just sort of says, we're still here, we haven't forgot about you, this is the current waiting time, this is the number if you need to call anyone. So just having that kind of weekly check-in made a real difference to that sort of feeling of being valued and being listened to as well throughout the process. So I guess, what do victims think? I think what I've tried to portray today is how much we can get out of narratives and the voice of victims, and how they can really embed into our research practices a real life experience and provide life to some otherwise quantitative reports and data. But it has to be something that the victim wants to, and it has to sort of mean something for them as well, and that it doesn't feel like a tick box exercise. So these are just some quotes from some of the victims that have gone through some of our forums. So we have the LEAF forum, and then we also have the North Wales Victims panel as well as participating in the local sort of OPCC run engagement forums too. So I think what was really sort of poignant for me was that victims were saying that you don't always get closure for the criminal justice system, but by being able to share their voice and share their story at this point, they've been able to get their closure. That they felt calmer and that they felt more understood after going through this process, and that they felt that they could have a voice again by providing this feedback and sort of participating in a forum. I think it's really important, as I mentioned before, that victims feel that they can help others after they've experienced something. And whether that's been a positive criminal justice outcome or a negative one, is that real sort of drive to sort of make sure that other people don't have similar experiences to them and how it can be improved. So moving forward, we'll continue to gather victims' experiences and their feedback at every opportunity, and trying to reduce those barriers continually around how they can provide their feedback. We'll continue to share those stories and share those narratives to bring to life stats and to inform policy developments and people that can actually make the real change. And we'll continue to feed back to victims the difference that they're making. I think that's really key as well, is that they understand what we've done with the information, why it's been important, and so that we can continue to encourage future participation, and that they can actually see, something practical about what's happened as a result of them giving up their time and sharing their stories. So hopefully, moving forward, if we can do all that, we can continue then to strengthen the victim's voice in our evidence and our data collections. And we can continue, as victim support, to amplify that voice in a way that is tailored to them and also is empowering for them as well. So I did have questions, but I think it's a panel. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Jess. So I am, being the chair of today's proceedings, going to change the agenda slightly so that we do have questions. So, do we have roaming mics? Does anybody want to? We do. Thank you, Lauren. Does anybody want to ask a question of any of our first three speakers today? Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Steve Williams, I'm a local councillor in Carmarthenshire in the Ellie ward. Jessica, great piece of work there. I know the victims, how important it is for them. You didn't mention anything about pastoral support. We're trying to achieve in Llanelli with the local vicar, Dyfed Richards, meeting with police. So we've got that pastoral support for them for any problems that may encounter, and that may help on the journey, in particular when you're talking about lived experiences and the chances for them to speak. Doing some work as well regards to veterans, and I don't know with yourselves, when you get victims as a veteran, victims who are veterans, what type of associations you've got with the different associations. Now, a lot of veterans do not think of themselves as a veteran until their 60s or 70s, and what you've got is, as well, you've got a number of female service personnel who have left the army, have not maintained connections with the army, and some people I'm dealing with at the moment are saying there's a lot of rape that's happening with these female ex-soldiers. So I don't know where you are at that at the moment. And communication with deaf groups, how easy is it for you to get, as your group, to get hold of a British Sign Language interpreter? And 17th of March is a Deaf Awareness Week, sorry, British Sign Language Awareness Week. And May, there's a Deaf Awareness Week. Is there anything with your reach out that you're able to share that awareness as well? A few questions, and I apologise.
Yes, sorry, I'll come closer to the microphone as well. So, as far as I'm aware, we don't do anything specifically around veterans and any sort of specific sort of tailored support. But I think you highlight a really big issue as well, because I can imagine for veterans that have experienced that as well, it's an additional barrier to even disclosing what's happened in the first place. Which is really important, I guess, why we have independent services, so not everything does need to go through the police, so that people can access support sort of independently. But I think the added layer of trauma that they might experience as well from both sides would definitely mean that they would have their own sets of challenges. And I think it'd be really interesting to look at sort of a specific veteran group, particularly those who want to have that peer support and learning that I mentioned in the speech, just because there's a real feeling of isolation and kind of who knows what I'm going through. So I think having that peer support element would be really beneficial then for anyone who's experienced that. So that's something, if you've got any links, it'd be great. Yeah, thank you. And the second question around the deaf community and how we engage. So we have Cynhadledd. So that provides immediate translation for a BSL connector via your phone. So it does literally happen straight away, and it connects you to a BSL interpreter. So we can provide support there and then with the use of a device. I believe most forces also use Cynhadledd. I'm not sure about Dyfed-Powys Police actually, but it's something that we do to actually do the practical support. And in terms of engagement, we do a lot through our training and engagement team at the Wales Hate Support Centre. So within that service, we've got a specific team specifically looking at engaging and raising awareness of hate crime. And we have worked with deaf groups via that service there, to sort of make sure they're aware of what hate crime looks like. But obviously we touch upon all crime as well. Yeah. Okay, brilliant. I think that the victim that I referred to in the talk would really like to be a part of those conversations as well. So yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, question in the centre there. Any other hands, by the way? We can get the mic moving around the floor. Yeah, there we are.
Yeah, my name's Claire and I work for the Welsh Government. It's a question for Dr. Matt Bland. When it comes to evidence-based policing, is there a reluctance to publish the fails for others to learn from them?
Is that on there? I mean, yes, there is generally. I mean, that's not new though, and it's not limited to just policing. That's a quirk of academia. Just generally, it's less interesting to publish studies which show null results. But I think some of the government-led studies, the ones that aren't sort of research institution based, that they will publish those ones that come back. Not necessarily if there's a backfire. I do think, I have seen things being stuck into top drawers, never to see the light of day again. We've got to be realistic. We need to try and get past that. And again, that sort of just speaks back to this whole issue about being okay with something that doesn't work. If everything we do is sort of doomed to success, we're not going to learn anything from it. But obviously that's going to be really difficult in terms of moving the needle in the public conversation as well, because ultimately policing is accountable to the public, PCCs are accountable to the public, so we've got to sort of really work on just normalising that language of even calling it a failure. It's not a failure if you learn something and it informs practice in future for the better, then that's not a failure. It's just a lesson learned.
Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, just in front there. Thank you. Alison?
Does that work in? Oh, yeah. My question is very similar to that question. So I suppose following on. So it's Alison Brown from South Wales Police. And that failure not an option point that you made, I think, having been sort of head of intelligence analysis for a long time in our force, is something that we see quite a lot. Is that my question, I suppose, is what can we do to embed a culture of just accepting that evaluation is really valuable, and it sort of helps us to focus on those things that we can do more of and those things that don't really add value, because having tried to sort of introduce evaluation many times, after sort of projects and things like that, there's really not an appetite for it. And sometimes people don't want to hear bad news as well. So, what can you recommend that we can start to do to try and just get people more comfortable with failure's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as you learn from it?
Yeah, I mean, there's no simple answer to that question, because otherwise we would have solved this already. And some of that comes from the top, and the top pushing back on the environment around. So PCCs, chief executives in organisations, being brave enough to go out there and say, "Oh, yeah, we tried this. It didn't, that didn't come out how we thought it was. We've changed things accordingly." That's really difficult. But culture change does involve the executive. It's very difficult to do it without it. I think, you know, there are some simple levers that can be pulled around, say, changing the emphasis of questions in promotion processes and things like that. None of them are going to make the difference on their own. From an individual perspective, it can get really frustrating. The best thing you can do is keep on trucking, is keep talking the language of evaluation, keep going back, keep being honest about the results, keep evaluating your own practices and encouraging that in the people who are around you. But there's no, I wish there was a magical formula that we could just execute the code on and it would work. But I think it's going to be a critical mass thing that we've just got to keep gathering people towards that, you know, that momentum, and then we'll get to the point when actually we got there. We're a lot further down the road than we were 20 years ago, for sure. I mean, you're head of intelligence analysis, Duffy will know this. We used to have results analysis as a national intelligence model product. The joke was you're never asked to do that. But evaluation is much more of the language. Look, here we are having a conference talking about it. You know, that sort of stuff wasn't happening 20 years ago. So we're going in the right direction, and we just need to keep going.
Great. I'm hopeful, Alison, that some of the training that's now being embedded, you know, for officers is that we'll see the Chief Constable who's joined us, Croeso Richard, as well, shared with me a statistic in Dyfed-Powys yesterday, and I hope I'm not misquoting you on this one, Richard, but 75% of our response frontline officers have got less than, was it 4-year service? 75%. So you can look at that in quite a negative way around, well, where's the experience, where's the tradecraft that in policing can, you know, be built over decades. But you can also look at the very positive fact that they've all come through the training schools very, very recently, which means that they will have had an embedding of evidence-based policing, problem-orientated policing, things that we, as Matt has rightly highlighted, have known about for a long time, but are now being embedded into training and is becoming sort of more regular parlance within policing. I'm going to take back a step to Elwyn's introduction around gwneud y pethau bychan, do the small things. I think we should try and bring evaluation into a daily routine. So for daily teams, neighbourhood policing teams, asking themselves, well, did what we did yesterday, did that work? And it could be just a series of a couple of questions that you're asking yourselves regularly. Have I improved myself from yesterday? Have we, you know, achieved some, and then, because there are levels to this, you can build through that level to more sophisticated academic-led longer-term studies as well. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for your interaction. Heartfelt thank you to our 3 first speakers this morning. We are a little bit behind time, but if you've ever been to a conference chaired by David Llewellyn previously, that's par for the course. So we are now about 15 minutes late. If we can return after a break, the toilets are just back through towards reception. There may be a replenishing of refreshments. I'm having nods from the back, so that's a positive sign. If we can get back started at 30 minutes past 11, I'd be grateful. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you.